You step outside. The feeder is low. You fill it, sunflower seeds, safflower, maybe a little suet on the coldest mornings, and you go back inside. You think you just fed some birds. You didn't. You just triggered 47 separate cognitive assessments happening simultaneously in the trees above your head. Every bird watching you right now is running calculations you never knew existed. And the results of those calculations determine something that will surprise you. Here's what science has actually documented about what happens inside a bird's mind every single time you show up at that feeder. Researchers from 3 separate institutions studied this. None of them expected what they found. The first thing a bird registers when you appear is not the food. It's you. Your face. Your posture. The way you move. The speed of your steps. Researchers at the University of Cambridge documented that wild birds, including common backyard species, form individual facial recognition profiles for the humans who appear near their feeding sites. Not human at the feeder. Not large creature approaching. You. Specifically you. A file they update every time you appear. The second you step outside, every bird in visible range is running your face against a mental database. And the result of that match will determine whether they stay or scatter. Let me be precise about what that database actually is. It is not a simple threat or safe binary. It is a multivariable profile built from dozens of individual observations, updated each time you appear, and cross-referenced against the behavior of other birds around you. The profile tracks the angle of your approach, whether you look directly at the feeder or away from it, how quickly your arms move, whether you pause, whether you make eye contact with the birds themselves. Each variable shifts the threat assessment up or down in real time. If you've been filling that feeder consistently, your profile looks a certain way. Calm approach. Predictable pace. No sudden arm movements. No direct stares at the birds. Threat level, low. Resource probability, high. A bird that has cataloged you as safe will not fly away when you approach. It will wait. Not because it's tame. Not because it's hungry enough to take a risk. Because you have been assessed, classified, and filed as someone worth trusting. That is not a small thing. A chickadee weighs 11 grams. The weight of 3 paperclips. And it is running a continuous threat model on every large animal in its environment. You made it onto the safe list. Now here is what happens in the 30 seconds after you fill the feeder and walk away. The first bird to approach is almost never the first bird watching. There is a hierarchy. And it operates with a precision that took researchers years to document. Dominant males approach first. Not because they're braver. Because they've earned the right to first access through social competition that happened before you ever came outside. They land, assess the new food supply, and signal, through posture, through specific call patterns, whether the resource is worth competing for. The other birds are watching this assessment from the trees. A relaxed posture from the dominant bird, approach safe. An alert posture, wait. A specific alarm call pattern, scatter. Something changed. The human behaved differently today. Cornell Lab of Ornithology studies on chickadee communication have documented that these birds use distinct call structures to encode threat level, distance, and size of potential predators, information shared across the flock in real time. When you come outside moving slowly and calmly, the chickadees near your feeder are broadcasting that information to every other bird in range. Your behavior is being narrated. Constantly. And here is the part of that narration most people never consider. They are not just reporting on you today. They are comparing you to every version of you they have ever seen. Here is something that took ornithologists decades to fully accept. Bird memory is not episodic in the way human memory is. It is spatial, relational, and extraordinarily precise. Where humans remember events as narratives, I went to the store, I saw my neighbor, we talked, birds encode experience as location-anchored behavioral maps. The chickadee does not remember, the human came out and filled the feeder last Tuesday. It remembers, this position, this movement pattern, this approach angle, this outcome. And it superimposes that memory onto every subsequent experience at the same location. What this means is that the birds in your yard have been building a spatial model of you since the first time you appeared at that feeder. They remember the day you moved differently, maybe you were carrying something, maybe you were in a hurry, and the whole yard went silent for 11 minutes. They remember the day you stood very still near the feeder and one curious chickadee landed 3 feet from your hand. They remember the season the feeder ran dry for 2 weeks. The recalibration afterward. The slow return of trust. They remember the last 3 winters. Which feeders you kept full. Which ones you let run out. Whether you added suet in the coldest weeks. This is not metaphor. This is documented cognitive behavior in animals with neural structures specifically evolved for exactly this kind of long-term environmental mapping. Researchers studying black-capped chickadees have found that these birds maintain spatial memory caches for up to 6 months, tracking the location of thousands of individual food stores across their territory with an accuracy that exceeds human spatial recall on equivalent tasks. The same neural architecture that maps the location of 10,000 hidden seeds maps the location and behavioral patterns of every significant element in the environment, including you. Your yard is a landscape they have memorized. And you are one of the landmarks. But here is what makes this more than just memory. It is active modeling. A bird that has observed you long enough is not just remembering what you have done. It is predicting what you will do. Research on corvids, jays, crows, ravens, has documented anticipatory behavior, birds positioning themselves at feeders before the human who fills them has even appeared at the door. They heard the sound of the container. They heard the footsteps. They heard the specific sequence of sounds that precedes your arrival. You have a behavioral signature. And it has been learned. The northern cardinal that appears at your feeder within 30 seconds of you filling it is not lucky. It was waiting. It anticipated you. It learned your schedule and built it into its morning routine. Now think about what this means for a moment. These birds are not passively benefiting from your presence. They are actively incorporating you into their world model. You are not background noise. You are a known, tracked, predicted element of their environment. You are a landmark that moves. A landmark that fills the feeder. A landmark that can be trusted, or can't. Here is the part that most people never learn. When a bird chooses to stay in your yard, to nest near your feeder, to return season after season, to bring its juveniles to feed within sight of your windows, it is not a random decision. It is the conclusion of an extended evaluation. Your yard competed against every other available territory in your neighborhood, against every other food source, against every other human within foraging range. Food reliability matters. But it is not the only variable. Researchers studying habitat selection in urban songbirds have found that the presence of a calm, predictable human, specifically one who does not disturb nesting sites, does not use pesticides that eliminate insect prey, and behaves consistently near feeding stations, is itself a positive selection factor. Birds choose yards partly because of the human in them. Your yard competed. Your yard was selected. You were selected. The criteria were food reliability, shelter quality, threat consistency, and the behavior of the large primate who keeps showing up near the food source. You passed. There is a moment that happens sometimes, maybe it's happened to you, when you're standing very still near the feeder and a bird lands closer than it should. Closer than makes logical sense for a prey animal near a predator-sized creature. It looks at you. Not past you. At you. And for a moment, the ordinary rules of the backyard seem suspended. That is not accidental proximity. That is not a bird being careless. That is the result of hundreds of individual assessments adding up to a single conclusion. This specific human, at this specific distance, at this specific moment, is not a threat. The bird is not being friendly in the way a dog is friendly. It is not performing comfort for your benefit. It is expressing the highest resolution trust a wild animal is capable of expressing. It has decided, based on accumulated evidence, that you are safe. Let me tell you what that decision actually costs the bird. A chickadee at 11 grams is prey for sharp-shinned hawks, Cooper's hawks, domestic cats, and eastern screech owls. Every moment of its life involves a continuous calculation of threat probability against resource value. When a chickadee chooses to stay on a feeder while you stand nearby, a creature 30,000 times its weight, it is placing a very specific wager. It is betting that its threat assessment of you is accurate. It is betting its life. It made that bet because of everything it has observed about you. The consistency of your approach. The slowness of your movements. The fact that you have appeared at that feeder dozens of times and have never once made a sudden movement toward a bird. The bird trusting you has done the math. And the math came out in your favor. You have been living next to a population of wild animals that have been quietly studying you. They know what time you usually come outside. They know which window you look through most often. They know the difference between your footsteps and a stranger's. Research on suburban songbird behavior has documented that familiar human presence actually suppresses predator alarm responses in certain bird species. Birds in close association with known trusted humans show lower baseline cortisol levels, lower physiological stress, than birds in territories without regular positive human contact. Your presence, specifically your calm and consistent presence, is measurably reducing the stress levels of the birds in your yard. You are not just feeding them. You are making them feel safer. That is a relationship. It may not look like the relationships you're used to, but the structure is there. The accumulated trust is there. The reduction of fear on both sides is there. And like any relationship, it can be deepened. When you see a pair of cardinals nesting in the shrubs near your house, they didn't end up there by accident. They reviewed their options. They weighed risk against resource. They factored in predator presence, shelter quality, food proximity. And then they decided that the space near your house, near you, was the safest place they could find to raise the next generation. That is a level of trust that took months to earn. The female cardinal who chose that shrub beside your fence, she considered your behavior. She noted that you move calmly through that area. She noted that you do not disturb the branches. She noted that other birds in your yard behave without alarm when you appear. You passed a nesting evaluation. She brought her eggs to your yard because of who you are near those birds. Consider the full weight of that for a moment. A wild animal, with no language to communicate and no way to verify your intentions, made a judgment call about your character based solely on behavioral evidence. And the judgment was, safe enough to raise my young beside. Every time you fill the feeder, even when you don't think about it, even when it's automatic, even when it's just Tuesday morning and you're half awake, you are making a deposit into a relationship that a wild animal is actively maintaining. Every day you show up is a data point. Every calm movement is evidence. Every feeder kept full through a cold week is registered. The bird that just landed on your feeder has a file on you. That file says, reliable, predictable, safe. It says, worth coming back to. Now I want to tell you something about what happens when that trust breaks. Because it does break sometimes. A construction project in the yard. A new dog. A period away when the feeders ran empty through February. An unfamiliar person who moved through the yard with unpredictable energy. The birds notice all of it. Research on trust disruption in wild bird feeding stations found that a single significant negative event, a predator attack near a feeder, a sudden large movement from the human, can suppress visitation rates by 60 to 80% for days or weeks. But the more important finding was this. In yards where the human had established a long baseline of calm, consistent behavior, trust recovery after disruption was significantly faster. The years of deposits matter. The slow accumulation of reliability matters. Because when something goes wrong, and eventually something always does, the birds don't start the assessment over from zero. They factor in everything they already know about you. Consistent for 3 years. This one disruption. Outlier? Or new pattern? A long history of trust buys you room for error. You are building that history. Every ordinary Tuesday morning. Every half-awake trip to fill the feeder before you've had your coffee. All of it counts. Every time you appear at that feeder, a wild mind somewhere in the branches above your head is updating a file it has been building since the first time you showed up. And every time you show up again, consistent, calm, unhurried, you are confirming what it already suspects. That you are someone worth trusting. That this yard is worth staying in. That the strange large creature who keeps filling the seeds is, against all evolutionary logic, safe. Here is what I find remarkable about all of this. The birds in your yard did not evolve to trust humans. There is no deep biological heritage of human-bird cooperation, the way there is for dogs or horses. The domestication that makes a dog look at you with trust encoded over 10,000 years of coevolution. The chickadee's trust in you was built entirely within its own lifetime. It assessed you from scratch. It weighed the evidence. It made a decision. Every wild bird that trusts you has done something a domesticated animal has never had to do. It chose you. Not because its genes told it to. Not because its parents told it to. Because it watched you long enough to decide for itself. That is not a small thing. Research on individual variation in bird boldness, what ornithologists call personality in birds, has found that some individual birds are constitutionally more cautious than others. The same species, the same age, the same environmental conditions, and one bird will approach a human feeder in 2 days while another takes 2 weeks. The cautious ones that eventually approach anyway, the ones that took the longest to decide, they chose harder than the bold ones. Their trust cost more. You may not know which birds in your yard are the cautious ones, but some of them are. And they are at the feeder anyway. This is what birds actually think every time you feed them. Not gratitude. Not dependency. Not randomness. Recognition. Assessment. Relationship. A continuous, updating, evidence-based understanding of who you are. There is something the science cannot fully quantify but also cannot rule out. The birds in your yard have been watching you through difficult seasons as well as easy ones. They have seen you come outside in the cold. They have seen you come outside on the mornings when your movement was different, slower, heavier, and the yard took longer to fill. They don't know what grief is. They don't know what illness is. They don't know what it means to wake up one morning and find it hard to cross the kitchen. But they register behavioral change. And their response to behavioral change in a trusted human is not alarm. It is patience. Research on bird behavior near long-term feeders has documented something that has no clean scientific label: a tendency for birds in established, trust-based relationships with humans to maintain visitation rates even during periods when the human's behavior changes, to continue appearing at the feeder, to continue watching the window, as if waiting for the familiar pattern to return. They stay. They come back. They are there when you return to the window. The science has not fully explained this. The science is honest about that. But you don't have to explain it to feel it. Every time you appear at that feeder, something in the branches above you notices. And every time you show up again, consistent, calm, unhurried, the whole yard shifts slightly. The alarm calls drop. The postures relax. The feeding resumes. Something in that yard is glad you're there. The science hasn't ruled that out. The yard you look out at right now is not the same yard it was before you understood this. You didn't just feed some birds today. You showed up. Again. And they noticed. They always notice. If you have ever stood at your window and felt, without being able to explain it, that the birds in your yard know you, tell me in the comments what that moment looked like. Where you were. What bird it was. What it did. I read every single one. And I promise you, what you felt was not your imagination. If someone you know feeds the birds in their yard, share this with them. They deserve to know what those birds actually think of them. And if you want to go deeper into what the birds in your yard are actually doing right now, the next video is right there.